the No Kings protests all around America, 7 million people allegedly participated. That's more than 2 million more than did in the June No Kings protest, said to be the biggest in U.S. history. I was at the Calvary Chapel Church, Chino Hills, giving a speech, and pulled up, and there were No Kings protesters all over the place, holding up signs. Down with fascism, down with fascism, down with ICE. So I rolled down the window and I said, give fascism a chance. Probably shouldn't have done that. And here in Southern California, where I am, tens of thousands came out to denounce Trump, to denounce ICE. One 25-year-old, according to the LA Times, named Jess Sanchez, said, we're here to fight fascism. We're not afraid. He said he had family members targeted in the recent immigration raids. The LA Times said that the gatherings were all about pushing back against Donald Trump, but also his policies on immigration, education, health care, and environmental protections. Immigration, education, health care, environmental protections. Let's just focus on those for a second. As you know, last 4 years, a minimum of 10, maybe 12, maybe 15, maybe 20. Nobody really knows because by definition, you don't know how many gotaways got away. What did they think was going to happen? That they would be allowed to stay, particularly the ones that Donald Trump says were in mental institutions, were criminals, those on the terror watch list. How were we supposed to get them out of the country without deporting a lot of people? Education. I'm not quite sure what they're talking about. The Department of Education that Donald Trump wants to close down, that has already been severely reduced, it spends about 10% of what we spend on education altogether around the country. So downsizing the DOE is why they're out there protesting. They're not protesting the scores of high schools in the inner city around the country where 0% of the kids can do math or read at grade level. They're not protesting the 13 public high schools in Baltimore, all located in the inner city where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level, that prompted the book whose author we recently interviewed called Failure Factory. Is that what you're protesting? Regarding health care, are you or are you not saying that illegal aliens are entitled to health care? And are you or are you not tacitly admitting that Obamacare has been a big, fat failure? It was designed to bend the cost curve down, which is how he famously put it. Instead, people are paying more now than they ever paid before. Their premiums are higher than they ever were before. And now you want what? Single payer? And environmental protections. Forgive the president for not agreeing with the environmental alarmism projected by people like Greta Thunberg and Al Gore, who've made ridiculously bad predictions about what was going to happen with our environment. So that's why you're out there? In June, as I mentioned, roughly 5 million people protested across the nation for the first No Kings protest. Now it's about 7 million. The LA Times also quotes a man named Pedro Sanchez, who came here from Mexico more than 50 years ago. Doesn't say whether he came legally or illegally. And he pointed to what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. Quote, look at what happened to Kimmel. If that could happen to him, it could happen to any of us. We want our rights back. We can't take this anymore, end of quote. Excuse me, what happened to Kimmel? Had an 8 or 9 day vacation. He's now back and bashing Trump the same way he did before. Riddle me this. Given the way Adolf Hitler came to power, how many newspapers, how many media outlets have been shut down by Donald Trump? I'm thinking the number is close to 0. Speaking of Adolf Hitler and how he came to power, how many of his enemies, Donald Trump, did he round up without any trial, without any grand jury, without anything, and put him behind bars? I'm thinking 0. Speaking of the way Adolf Hitler came to power, how many of Donald Trump's political enemies has he had killed? I'm thinking 0. Isn't this kind of stupid to refer to Donald Trump as a king? Everything he does, he gets sued. And generally speaking, he wins his cases. And when he loses them at the appellate level or at the district court level, he appeals them. And eventually, he pretty much prevails in the U.S. Supreme Court. How is that being a dictator? A filmmaker named Matthew Faw, F-A-W, was wearing an Uncle Sam costume intended to make a point. Quote, "The symbols of America have been stolen by people who want to insist that America means white, Christian, patriarchal power." Let me pause right there. Can you give me the quote when Donald Trump said America should be white? Should be white, Christian, patriarchal. Did Donald Trump ever say that? Did anybody in his administration ever say that? Who is saying that? You read this article, and the people out there are all protesting things that Trump never said, doesn't intend, doesn't support. The symbols of America have been stolen by people who want to insist that America means white, Christian, patriarchal power. What symbols have been stolen? What are you talking about? I'm afraid it's happening so fast that we won't be able to get the country back that I grew up in, close quote. Where was this guy in the last 4 years when Donald Trump was being persecuted? Not prosecuted, persecuted. Where was he when 51 former intelligence officials write this letter falsely claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation? When media outlets were pressured into not publishing the New York Post story that exposed the Hunter Biden laptop. Where were you? One study shows that in the 7 swing states, something like 16% of Biden voters say they would not have voted for Biden had they known about the Hunter Biden laptop story. In other words, the suppression of that story altered the outcome of the 2020 election. Where were you? Where were you when the special counsel went after Donald Trump for allegedly interfering with the election on January 6th, gone up to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court says there are certain powers that are official and unofficial, and you need to determine whether or not Donald Trump complaining about the election was official or unofficial. That lawsuit has now gone nowhere. Where were you when Donald Trump was investigated by the special prosecutor for having documents, classified documents, when Joe Biden was not president, could not declassify the documents, had them in more places than Donald Trump, and because he was an elderly man with a poor memory, nothing happened to him. The charges against Donald Trump have now gone away as well. Where were you when Alvin Bragg and Letitia James ran promising to get Donald Trump, something that is a violation of the canons of ethics of a prosecutor? Where were you then?